State question 794, of course, is Marsy's Law. And of course, the last state question we were just talking about is the only state question that you'll actually have on the ballot that was initiative petition. So all the other state questions that we're going to talk about from here on out have gone through the legislature. And
maybe let's back up for just a second. For people that don't know, initiative petition means they actually had folks that had a certain number of days. I forget whether it's 90 days or 120. There's a certain number of days that they're allowed to go out and get a number of signatures, and it has to be a percentage of the folks that voted in the last presidential or governor's race.
Right, depending on whichever cycle you're in.
And so that these days to get done in that time period, that usually means somebody, besides volunteer folks signing, it usually means somebody's paying money to help hire folks to get enough signatures. But so that first question on optometrist was an initiative petition. Folks actually got the signatures and got that on the ballot. These next four all came through the legislature.
They did through resolution. State question 794 amends provisions of the Oklahoma Constitution to guarantee that victims have co-equal rights alongside those accused and convicted. The rights to be added and enumerated include right of notice of all proceedings and to be heard in any proceeding involving sentencing, parole, or release, right to talk with the prosecutor, right to reasonable protection, right to proceedings free from unreasonable delay, allow victims to refuse interview requests from the defendant's attorney without a subpoena. So what are some of the supporters saying about Marsy's Law? Marsy's Law would ensure that victims had the same co-equal rights as the accused and convicted, nothing more, nothing less. Prosecutors and law enforcement organizations from across the state support State Question 794. Opponents say Marsy's Law could undermine due process. So basically, as we're making these presentations, there hasn't been a lot of activity in and around the negativity on Marsy's Law. This one did move through the legislature, and I always start by saying this and kind of giving a sense of how the legislature looked at this legislative referendum. There were no votes on Marsy's Law as it moved through the process. The origination of Marsy's Law basically came from California. There was a victim of a crime that the person who was accused moved in a few doors down. It started a national conversation about basically allowing for additional victims' rights. Many of the rights that we saw on the screen earlier are in state statute today, but in states like California and others that have adopted it, of course, there are 5 to 7 states that could adopt Marsy's Law also. In those states, it basically overwhelmingly passed. And basically all this does is extend those rights to those victims, expand some rights to victims, and remove them from statute and move them into the Oklahoma Constitution.
And I think, 6 states have enacted it so far, and as you said, 6 or 7 states are voting on it this November. At the same time, our state is voting on it. So it's part of kind of a national trend.
It is.
We only mentioned on there the one opponents say that it could undermine due process. Another, I think one of the states that's already passed it, and somebody at one of our county farm bureaus that was pointing out to me that I think South Dakota passed it, and then they discovered that there was quite a bit of expense, at least in their state, to try to keep record of all the victims and how to communicate back. And so South Dakota has come back with a legislative rollback of some of the things.
Sure.
Because they're saying that a second reason that's been a problem is just the manpower that it takes for a county or state.
Or a district attorney.
Right, to keep track of who all the victims are and where they're at, so that they can give notice if they're having a hearing or being released from prison or jail.
It's a very good point. Now, the one thing where maybe in South Dakota that they didn't have that our Oklahoma district attorneys have are a few tools like Vine and things like that allow for some of that easily to be tracked. So there are some differences within states, and some states are more set up to probably accommodate the additional manpower that it's going to take to actually run something like this. But from the perspective, that is one additional thing that we have heard, that the cost could be great and I would agree that the cost could be great if we were starting from scratch in terms of how to actually track some of the victims or the accused of crime.
And one thing that helps in our state is some years back we made a move towards one court it's been an exciting ride sometimes getting all that software and hardware to work. But we did make a move towards a statewide court reporting system,
OSCN,
which I think is a benefit in this compared to some states that may not have a statewide.
Correct, and they use that system as well as Vine to help with. They have the ability to use those systems to actually help with making sure that this is complied with in our Oklahoma Constitution.
My wife and I were victims of a bad economic crime some years ago, and the federal system, they do have a system, and it's been of great comfort to us to get notices as that process moved along, and so I can imagine that would be even more meaningful for someone who's a victim of a
criminal act.
It's especially of whether it's rape or attempted murder or some other type of physical injury. So it's easy to sympathize and understand the need for Marsy's Law.
Probably one of the reasons why there was very little opposition in the legislature as it was moving through the process. There is some passion in and around Marsy's Law in terms of making sure that the victim of crime do understand and know everything that's going on within the criminal case that they're following. And that's as we travel around, that is one of the issues that you see, they discuss, but at the end of the day, and I'm trying to give a little bit of a sense of where these actually stand. So far within our state, it looks like this one is polling extremely well, and without a organized opposition, which in the 6 states that you referred to earlier, Rod, those states didn't have really any organized opposition to the idea of trying to make sure that the victims of crime were up to speed in terms of what was going on within the case they were following.
And officially, State Chamber doesn't have an opinion on this one.
We did not take an official position on State Question 794.
The Oklahoma Farm Bureau does have some all of our policies are presented at the county level and then adopted at the state level by our members. So this is actually a policy that was developed by our membership. We recommend that Farm Bureau support legislation mandating the crime victim's surviving family be notified in advance and given the privilege to attend any or all parole hearings of the convict who committed the crime against them and is being considered for parole. So that's somewhat similar to part of what Marsy's Law does. So
sure.
You can see, I think our members are pretty firmly behind this one. So
and it makes sense. I mean, because anybody that's ever been a victim or been a friend of somebody that's been a victim has sympathy for that victim, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why this state question seems to be doing so well.